Hello, welcome back to another pen talk. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining me as I explore the wide world of Osprey pens. This is another one of the series, and we're going to look at some different nibs that I received from Osprey. As well, everything that they sent me, they came very well labeled. And yes, these are two flex nibs. One's a broad and one's an extra fine. So I think that really covers the gambit. And they came in an assembly like this. But this is the broad stub that I took out of my Milano so I could put in one of the flex nibs. And what I did was I unscrewed the flex nib from its assembly here so I could get the section to match up with what the section is on the Milano, which is this nice black and blue ebonite. So what's nice is you can do that. If you wanted to, you could just also screw this assembly into the Milano, and you'd be all set to go. Really nice modular design. Something you got to admire. And of course these flex nibs have ebonite feeds, which is a trademark that Osprey has done. Nice cutouts. Everything else. And that's how that black section would look. I just prefer to keep that ebonite section, and thankfully I can do it. So we're going to look at that broad nib. And of course, we're going to ink it up with Noodler's Navajo Turquoise. The other thing that we'll do is compare it to the flex nib that came in the Madison, which is a number 6. And the number 6 nib has a much bigger feed on it, so therefore it doesn't fit into the normal sections that come with the Milano or the Scholar. So they've made a different section for the Madison, which accommodates these 5.5 nibs, and we might look at that, but we're just going to now just compare, I think, these three nibs, see how they write, and see if we like them. So one of the things to admire about Osprey pens is they label every nib. You know, there's that stub broad, there's the extra fine, and there's the broad of these 5.5 flex nibs. So that's very, very nice. You don't have to try to guess as to what the size of the nib is that you're writing with. Kudos. Before we do the writing sample, just, overview of some of the ergonomics of this Milano pen. It's nice and light. For full specs, please see the video where I went into detail on this pen, specifically just as a review. This is to focus on that interesting broad 5.5 flex nib with an ebonite feed inked up with a Navajo Turquoise. Let's put that nib on paper and see how it puts down ink. I'm extremely happy. This nib is very, very smooth. On the verge of almost being too smooth. I like a little more tooth and feedback, but for those that like a smooth nib, this would certainly work well for you. It lays down a nice consistent line, but I think we need to see what happens when you put pressure on it. So these are your horizontal strokes with no pressure, vertical strokes with no pressure. We'll add a little bit of pressure, we'll add a little bit of more pressure, and that's as comfortable as I'm going to push it, but I would say that's at least equal to a 3B, and it starts out really with a, I would say, B, 0.7 millimeters, and jumps up to 1.5 or so. So it does do that, and you can flex it. We'll see if we can actually do some script flex writing. You're not going to get as much of a variation with writing. I mean, this is pushing it. And as you can see, I'm putting down a lot of ink, and we're getting a little bit of feathering on this Fabriano paper. I have a few of these pads that I bought, and I've been doing all my reviews on them, so I'm going to continue to do that, even though they're not as consistent as they used to be. Or maybe I'm just putting on a lot more ink than I used to. When you compare this broad to the extra fine 5.5 flex nib, hold on, I need to ink it up. So in order to swap these nibs, I'm just going to unscrew this nib assembly from the Milano and screw in this extra fine. Yes, we got ink all over everything, but that's par for the course. It's certainly a lot more tipping material on that broad nib. They definitely do try to stay true to those markings on those nibs. Let's put this together, prime the feed, test it out, and then show you how it writes. So we've swapped in the extra fine, and technically what I should have done was re-ink the pen, pushing out the ink that's in there, saturating the nib and feed, pulling up fresh ink. But instead of doing that, what I did was after I put the new nib in, I just let it set this way like you would if you were filling an eyedrop or whatever. And eventually the ink works itself down through the feed to the nib, and after a minute it wrote fine. So let's compare it to the broad. You may have asked how easy it is to pull the nib, and it's pretty easy. I use my lobster band grippers. I grip the nib assembly with one gripper, and then the feed and nib with the other gripper, and I do a slight twist and pull at the same time, slowly working it out, increasing pressure if it doesn't move right in the beginning. I thought we'd just take a close-up look at this feed, and it is a classic designed feed. Nice big channel there, a lot of fins, and here's a close-up of the extra fine nib. It's done well, writes nicely. Unfortunately, when I started this writing session with the extra fine Osprey 5.5 nib, I didn't have the camera on. Duh. But I want to just go over this real quickly to show the significant difference between the broad and the extra fine. I mean, that's certainly a big difference. I also did the 6.0, which you'll see later. But I went back and did this filming. And yes, you can railroad it. And we'll show some live writing now of this extra fine flex nib. Since I didn't have my camera on when I first wrote with this extra fine flex nib, thought we might like to see some live writing. This has become one of my favorite little things to do. As I pour more pressure, you can see that the tines open up, and that's a nice line variation. It takes a fair amount of pressure, but all these steel flex nibs that I've experienced have a similar type of feel. This is better than average in my experience, and it works well. That's definitely a fine line, and you can see it a railroad, and it's definitely a wider line. But it's a nib you need to learn how to write with. So we're going to compare this Osprey number 6 nib, which is a fine flex nib, to the broad extra fine, and this is now the fine. mean, you get some good line variation with this, and you can railroad, as all of these nibs can do, but that's still a nice line. Which do I like better, the 6.0 or the 5.5? I hate to say it's a push. You know, if you like a bigger nib and you want to use the Madison, but I'm just impressed with the range of nibs, how well they work, and how much I enjoy them. Here are the 10 nibs that I've reviewed so far from Osprey, and they're all winners. Here we go down the normal number 6 nibs here. I've added the 5.5 broad flex because I think it fits into these 3 broads here. You can see the width of the line. And all of these nibs laid down a fair amount of ink, and that Zebra G just blew them all out of the water. And none of these are dry nibs by any stretch of the imagination. And here's the 2 flex nibs, the extra fine, the 5.5 and the 6.0 fine. And you can get to see a little bit of a difference there between the way that they work. So hopefully this is an interesting little chart. And I have 2 more nibs in a future review to review. Not certain how they'll fit into this group, but we'll see when that time comes. Stay tuned. The closing is going to be a little bit different because I didn't have the camera on when I wrote this. So I'd like to thank all of you very much for watching my video. Comment if you want, ask me a question, like it if you like it. You know, it's always good to do that. It promotes my channel, and YouTube then recognizes that people are watching it, and they will promote my video to other people, and then more people will watch it, and hence my social media footprint will become larger. I hope all of you are safe, healthy, and happy, enjoying every day, enjoying writing with your pens, enjoying putting ink on paper, hopefully enjoying some of the things you watch on YouTube. We've reached the end of this video. I enjoyed writing with these nibs. Hopefully you enjoyed watching me write with these nibs. We're going to say bye. And yes, that nib flex is pretty good. And yes, you can railroad it. But boy, does that lay down a lot of ink. Stay safe until the next video.